Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well today. In this video, I'm going to start a series where I give you a kind of crash course in logic. In this video, we're going to talk about, well, what exactly is an argument? And then we'll talk about the different parts of an argument, how to identify an argument's premises and its conclusion by using premise indicators and conclusion indicators. After we've done this, I'm just going to briefly conclude by talking about the mindset with which you ought to approach an argument so as to maximize the chance that you will be productive in engaging with an argument. So you all have talked about arguments outside of this class, and so I want you to think briefly about what comes to your mind when you hear this word. Maybe something like this picture pops into your mind, and you think about disagreements or some controversies, maybe particular topics like politics, religion, or morality where arguments are prevalent. Maybe you think about debate, or maybe winners and losers to arguments. Maybe you think about people yelling and shouting, getting very passionate, maybe even getting angry. Maybe because you think of anger, maybe you think about arguments as something that's unpleasant, something you want to avoid. Like when I say late at night, when a touchy topic comes up and I say, I don't want to talk about that right now. I don't want to get into an argument when I say it to my wife. Well, but there's some other ideas that are also commonly associated with arguments that are going to be much more closely related to how we're going to understand the idea in this class. So maybe you thought of evidence or giving proof or sort of expressing your beliefs or giving reasons why you believe those or trying to support your beliefs, maybe defending a thesis. All of these ideas are closely connected to the idea of an argument as we'll use it in this class. So the technical definition that we're going to work with as philosophers is as follows. An argument is any series of statements where some of these supposedly provide support for one of the others. Now there's two parts to this definition, notice. The first part says that an argument is a series of statements. The second part says, well, some of those statements are supposedly providing support for one of the others. So let's break this down. That first condition says there has to be a series of statements. Well, a statement is just a sentence that's capable of being either true or false. Some examples. I make the statement that my name's Sam. Now, my name really is Sam, so this is true. Or I might make the statement that the Eiffel Tower is in Japan. So this sentence sort of creates a picture of the world where there's an object, the Eiffel Tower, at a certain location, namely Japan. Now, the picture that this sentence sort of draws of the world is mistaken, and so the sentence is false. Now, some statements are always true, like mathematical statements such as 2 + 2 = 4. They're still statements even though they're never false because they're at least one or the other. They are true in this case. Now, here there's some statements like the number of dinosaurs that have lived on Earth is even, where they are either true or false, but maybe we don't know which one. Maybe we'll never know. So purple here just means we're unsure. So statements are sentences that are either true or false, but I want to make clear because students get confused about this sometimes. We can make statements about both objective and subjective matters. So consider the following statements. 2 + 2 = 4. Electrons have negative charge. I love cookie dough ice cream. Starry Night is a beautiful painting to me. So these are all statements, even though some of these are about objective facts and others are about sort of subjective preferences. So each claim is either true or false. So the last two are usually thought to be subjective because, well, whether you love ice cream sort of might change from person to person. But notice, I can still lie about my own subjective preferences. I could tell you that I love cookie dough ice cream even if I hate it. And so this statement is either true or false. Nonetheless, when you engage in an argument, not everything a person says will be a part of their argument because people can say things that wouldn't qualify as a statement. So if I call my wife up on the phone and I say, do we have any soda at home? Or I say, pick up some milk while you're at the store. Neither of these sentences can be true or false. And so when an author asks a question, for instance, that part of the passage can't actually be part of their argument. All right, so also that first condition says that it has to be a series of statements. This means making a single statement or expressing a single belief you have doesn't qualify as giving or engaging in an argument. So, for instance, if you see two people and one person says, God created the universe, and the other one says, nope, there is no God. Neither of them is engaging in an argument. They're both just making a single claim. They're just contradicting one another. So you have to have a series of statements, but not just any series of statements will do. So consider Sam has a red desk. The Eiffel Tower is in France. A movie based on the science fiction book Dune will be released in 2021. These are all statements, so I have a series of statements, but there's no argument here. And that's because there's not the right kind of connection between these statements. So consider a movie based on the sci-fi book Dune will be released in 2021, and an article from Collider from October reported that Warner Brothers officially delayed the release until October 2021 due to the COVID pandemic. Well, in this case, I'm making two statements, but they are very closely connected. The statement about the Collider report is meant to support, sort of hold up, this sort of idea, this claim that the movie's going to release in 2021. So that's where this second condition comes in. Not only must there be a series of statements, but some of those statements need to attempt to support. That attempted supports the relevant connection you need to turn those series of statements into an argument. Now, not every series of statements will make an argument, since sometimes someone will give a report or just to explain things or give an example or offer a warning instead of trying to convince the reader of anything. So consider this passage. Is this passage an argument? Well, no, this is not an argument, because in this passage, there's just a list, there's a report of information all about the coronavirus, but none of it's trying to convince you of any particular conclusion. And so it's a report and not an argument. Now consider this passage. Is this an argument or not? This is an argument, because there's a series of statements, and a number of the claims made in this passage are meant to convince you of, give some reasons to believe that sort of mandating masks is a permissible exercise of state police powers. Now, in this regard, the parts of an argument then can be divided into two kinds of statements that will occur. There are premises, and these are the statements in an argument that are supposedly providing the support for one of the others. These are the ones that sort of serve as the supposed evidence. The conclusion of the argument is the statement in an argument that is supposedly receiving the support. It's the statement that the argument aims to convince the audience to believe. So picking out the premises and conclusion is sometimes going to be easy, but other times it's going to be a lot of work. And there's some words or phrases that you can look for that can help you sort of give clues as to where the premises are and where the conclusion is. We call these premise indicators. Some examples are since, because, given that, firstly, secondly, as indicated by, due to, owing to. These are all phrases that oftentimes introduce premises that someone's going to use to try to support a conclusion. So there's also conclusion indicators. These include things like therefore, thus, hence, consequently, so, as a result, shows that, follows that. These are phrases that authors often use to say, here's what I'm trying to convince you of. Here's the conclusion. So these indicator words are not foolproof. Sometimes you'll see these words being used for other purposes than introducing premises or a conclusion. And sometimes an author will give a premise or conclusion without using any of these indicators. Now, here's just a little hint. If you see a passage that has no conclusion indicator, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes it's the first sentence in that passage. Now, authors also sometimes leave important premises implicit or unstated because they think they're so obvious they don't need to state them. Similarly, even a conclusion, sometimes an author will leave implicit because they think it so obviously follows from what they've said that they just leave it to the reader to draw that conclusion. Nonetheless, when you're reconstructing an author's reasoning, you should explicitly state all the premises and conclusion, even if the author is leaving them unstated or as just sort of assumptions. So when you engage with a passage of philosophy, you should consider the following. Ask, is the passage presenting an argument or is it doing something else? You should ask, if it's an argument, what are its premises? And does the author leave any premises implicit? What's the implicit or explicit conclusion of the argument? Once you've done that, you'll sort of be able to see what the argument is, and only then will you be in a position to try to figure out if it's a good argument or bad argument. That's what we'll discuss in the next video. However, I do want to say a couple things about the mindset with which you ought to approach arguments. Ideally, you shouldn't be thinking of arguments as combative tools for crushing your opponent and sort of defeating them. Arguments are tools that help us discover and reflect on the evidence or support, or maybe the lack of support, for various beliefs that we and others hold. So engaging in an argument is not a chance to crush your opponent. Rather, it's an opportunity for both you and others to learn from each other. So when we think of arguments this way, by engaging in argument with others, it can help us to understand why another person believes what they do. So if we disagree with another person, by listening to their argument, by trying to figure out what their argument is, we can understand why they hold that belief. It can also help us clarify why we believe what we do and to communicate that to another person. By instead of just saying, well, here's what I believe, you can say, well, here's what I believe, and here's why I believe it. Here are the premises that led me to that conclusion. And in doing so, we invite others and ourselves to reflect on the evidence or reasons that sort of we or they might have missed, and thereby provide them with additional information. So by saying, well, here's what I believe, and here's why I believe it. When I go through that, the why I believe it might be a number of things that that person just didn't know. And once they have that information, they can then use it to maybe fix their beliefs. And moreover, by reflecting on these arguments, we might be able to illustrate gaps in other people's thinking. We can show them how their conclusion doesn't follow from the sort of premises or the evidence that they've given. Or similarly, they can sort of help us discover gaps in our own thinking. By letting them know what our premises are and what our conclusion is, they can sort of point out when there's a gap between our premises and conclusion. So criticizing an argument doesn't need to criticize the person giving the argument. Rather, it's an attempt to illustrate how their premises fall short of supporting their conclusion. So, when we engage in argument, we should practice intellectual humility. Look, humans are fallible. We make mistakes. And sometimes we're the ones that made a mistake, not the other person. And we should go into the argument sort of appreciating that that's a possibility. And we should appreciate that there might be gaps in our reasoning that led us to a conclusion, even if our conclusion is correct. So even if we're in the right, we might use arguments to learn how to better understand the other person's position and also how to clean up potential holes in our own reasoning. So as such, whether we're right or wrong, engaging in an argument with someone who we disagree is an opportunity for us to gain something from that argument. So that's all for this video. Next time, we're going to start looking at how to evaluate arguments. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.